Zora Neale Hurston was the most successful black female writer of the first half of the 20th century in America. She was the first black graduate of Barnard College. She studied anthropology under Franz Boas, the father of the field. She published 4 novels, 2 books of folklore, an autobiography, and more than 50 short stories during her career. She was the queen of the Harlem Renaissance, the brightest star in a whole constellation of black literary geniuses. But when she died in 1960, she was penniless, working as a maid. Living in a welfare home in Fort Pierce, Florida, her neighbors had to take up a collection just to bury her. They raised $661 in total. That was enough for a grave plot, but not enough for a headstone. A literary genius was buried in an unmarked grave. This is the story of how America threw away one of its greatest writers and the woman who brought her back to life. To understand Zora Neale Hurston, you have to understand where she came from. That starts with a town called Eatonville, Florida, incorporated in 1887. One of the first all-black self-governing towns in the entire United States. Here, black families lived free from the daily humiliations of the Jim Crow South. They had their own laws and leaders. Zora's father, John Hurston, was not just a Baptist preacher and a carpenter. He was elected mayor 3 separate times. Zora was born in 1,891 inches, Notasulga, Alabama, but moved to Eatonville as a toddler. She would always call it her home. Here is what made Eatonville so important to her story. Zora grew up not even knowing she was considered a minority. The only white people she ever saw were travelers passing through. She did not learn what racism felt like until age 13. Years later, she wrote these words, "I am not tragically colored. There is no great sorrow dammed up in my soul at all. I do not belong to the sobbing school of Negrohood who hold that nature somehow has given them a low-down, dirty deal. That confidence, that fierce defiance, it was forged in Eatonville. But her childhood paradise was not meant to last. In 1904, when Zora was just 13 years old, her mother, Lucy, died. Her father remarried quickly, too quickly for Zora. The family fell apart after that. Zora was sent away to boarding school, then kicked out when her father stopped paying. For years, she bounced from job to job, a maid for a theater troupe, a manicurist in a barber shop, whatever paid the bills. Then, at 26 years old, Zora Neale Hurston did something remarkable. She decided to go back to high school again. To qualify for free education in Baltimore, she lied about her age. She claimed to be 16 years old. No one questioned it. From there, she went on to Howard University, one of the most prestigious historically black colleges in the entire nation. At Howard, she began writing seriously. Her first short story was published in the school literary magazine back in 1921. Her stories caught the attention of Alan Locke, the dean of the Harlem Renaissance. He told her to come to New York City. In January 1925, Zora Neale Hurston arrived in Harlem with less than $2 in her pocket. But she had something more. She had a voice unlike anything the literary world had ever heard before. A voice that would change American literature forever. She won a scholarship to attend Barnard College in New York City. She was the only black student in the entire institution. There, she would meet the man who changed everything for her, Franz Boas, known as the father of American anthropology. Franz Boas was a revolutionary thinker. At a time when scientific racism dominated academia, he argued all cultures were equal. He saw something special in Zora. Here was a black woman who had grown up inside the very culture he wanted to understand. Under Boas, Zora learned to see her childhood in a new light. The folktales and songs of Eatonville were worth preserving. In 1928, she became Barnard's first black graduate. She earned her degree in anthropology and a mission to document culture. But Zora was not just a scientist collecting data. She was also becoming one of the biggest literary stars of her generation. In 1926, she joined Langston Hughes and Wallace Thurman to create Fire, a magazine that would define the Harlem Renaissance. At a time when Black writers were expected to focus on racial protest and anger, Zora Neale Hurston did something different. She celebrated Black culture, the humor and the music, the everyday poetry of Black Southern life, the joy, not just the pain. She traveled to Jamaica, Haiti, and across the American South, collecting stories and studying Vodou religious traditions. In 1935, she published Mules and Men, the first collection of African American folklore ever compiled by a Black American. Then came her masterpiece. In 1936, Zora was in Haiti on a Guggenheim Fellowship. She was heartbroken over a failed romance. In just 7 weeks, only 7 weeks, she wrote Their Eyes Were Watching God, a novel that would define American literature. The story follows Janie Crawford, a Black woman in the rural South searching for love and selfhood entirely on her own terms. It is now considered one of the greatest American novels ever written, but when it came out in 1937, it was not celebrated. Richard Wright, the famous author of Native Son, dismissed her work. He said Hurston was pandering to white reading audiences. He wrote that she exploited the quaint phase of Negro life, the phase which evokes a piteous smile from the superior race, W.E.B. Du Bois himself criticized her. He said her use of Black dialect in her writing made Black people look primitive. But Zora did not care what they thought. She once wrote, "Sometimes I feel discriminated against, but it does not make me angry. It merely astonishes me," she continued. "How can anyone deny themselves the pleasure of my company? It is beyond me to understand." That kind of confidence and self-assurance did not make her popular with the Black literary establishment of her era at all. She published Dust Tracks on a Road in 1942. It was a critical success. She was profiled in Who's Who in America that year. For a brief moment, it seemed like Zora Neale Hurston had finally won. But the fall from grace was already quietly beginning. Despite all her fame, Zora never made much money from her writing. Her largest royalty check ever was just $900. By the 1940s, the literary world was changing around her. Folk culture celebration was giving way to gritty social realism. Writers were now expected to focus primarily on racial injustice. Zora's celebration of Black life seemed suddenly out of touch. Then, in 1948, came the blow that nearly destroyed everything she had built, a scandal that would shatter her entire reputation. Zora was falsely accused of molesting a 10-year-old boy in New York City. The charges made headlines across the Black press. She had clear proof she was not even in the country when the alleged abuse took place. She had been in Honduras doing research. The charges were eventually dropped completely, but the damage to her reputation was already done. It could not be undone easily. The Baltimore Afro-American newspaper ran the story under a shocking headline. They never bothered to cover her full exoneration. Zora later said, "I care nothing for anyone's opinion about me. My own verdict is the only one that I truly respect in the end." But privately, she was absolutely devastated by what had happened to her name and her legacy. She even contemplated suicide. Her political views did not help her situation either. In 1954, the Supreme Court ruled school segregation unconstitutional. Zora opposed the Brown versus Board of Education ruling. She argued Black schools could be just as good as any white schools. To be clear, many historians strongly disagree with her reasoning on this issue, but her stance made her a pariah in her circles. By the 1950s, every single one of her books had gone out of print. She moved back to Florida. She had nowhere else left to go. The queen of the Harlem Renaissance took a job as a domestic maid in a Miami suburb. Her employer had no idea who she really was. A reporter discovered her working there and wrote a story about it. It was treated as a scandal instead of a national tragedy. Zora remained defiant until the end. She said she was not ashamed of honest work, but she never stopped writing and submitting. In 1957, she moved to Fort Pierce, Florida, where an old friend from Eatonville let her live in a small house completely rent-free. She worked as a substitute teacher at the local school. She wrote a column for the local black newspaper. She kept on going. In 1959, she suffered a devastating stroke. She was forced to move into the Street Lucy County Welfare Home to receive basic care. The Welfare Home, Barnard College's first black graduate, the woman who had dined with celebrities and studied with Franz Boas. She was now penniless, completely alone, utterly forgotten by the literary world she had once conquered with her brilliant words. On the 28th of January 1960, Zora Neale Hurston died of hypertensive heart disease in that welfare home. She was 69 years old. She had no money left at all, no family members by her bedside, just a typewriter, a kerosene lamp, and stacks of her papers. When news of her death spread, her friends from around the country took up a collection. They raised $661. That was enough to buy a grave in the Garden of Heavenly Rest Cemetery, a segregated burial ground in Fort Pierce, Florida. But it was not enough for a headstone. So Zora Neale Hurston, one of America's greatest writers, was buried in an unmarked grave. About 100 people came to her funeral service. They remembered the woman who could light up any room she ever entered. Then they all went home to their own lives, and Zora Neale Hurston, a genius of American letters, was completely forgotten. There is one more detail to this part of the story that absolutely breaks my heart every single time I think about it today. After she died, a yardman was told to clean out her house completely. He started burning all of her belongings in a trash pile. A man named Patrick Duval saw the flames rising. He had known Zora since he was just a young student in school. He ran to help. He pulled her manuscripts and papers out of the burning trash pile with his own hands. He kept them safe on his porch for years. Eventually, those rescued papers made it to the University of Florida archives. Without Patrick Duval, they would all be ashes. For 13 long years, Zora's grave sat completely unmarked in that cemetery. Weeds grew thick over it. The place fell apart. All of her books went out of print during those years. A whole new generation of readers had no idea she had ever even existed. 13 years of total obscurity. Let that sink in for a moment. 13 years of being completely erased from literary history. In the early 1970s, a young black writer named Alice Walker was teaching literature at Wellesley College in Massachusetts. Alice Walker loved Zora Neale Hurston's work deeply. She once said if stranded on a desert island, 2 of her 10 books would be Zora's. But when she asked her own students about Hurston, none of them knew the name. All of her books had long since gone out of print. Alice Walker decided she had to do something about this injustice. In the summer of 1973, she drove all the way down to Florida. She went to Eatonville first, trying to find anyone who still remembered Zora personally. Most people had never even heard of her. Then she drove on to Fort Pierce. She was determined to find Zora's grave and honor it properly after all those forgotten years. To get information from locals, Walker pretended to be Zora's niece. It was the only way she could get people to talk to her. She learned that Zora had been buried somewhere in the Garden of Heavenly Rest Cemetery, but nobody knew the exact location. Walker went to the cemetery herself to search. It was an overgrown jungle by then, waist-high weeds everywhere, snakes too. She waded through the thick weeds, calling out loud, "Zora! Zora!" as if the dead woman might somehow answer her desperate calls. Then her foot suddenly sank into a sunken patch of ground. It measured about 6 feet by 3 feet, an unmarked grave at last. Walker could not be absolutely certain it was Zora's final resting place, but it was in the right general location for the burial. She made a decision right then and there. She ordered a headstone to be made. She could not afford the grand one she truly wanted. She had wanted black granite called ebony mist for the memorial. Instead, she chose a simple gray stone marker she could afford. She chose the inscription very carefully. Zora Neale Hurston, a genius of the South, novelist, folklorist, anthropologist. The birth year on the stone was wrong. Zora had always lied about her true age. But the epitaph itself was absolutely perfect. In March 1975, Alice Walker published her essay in Miss Magazine. It was titled, "In Search of Zora Neale Hurston." It changed history. Walker wrote, "We are a people. A people do not throw their geniuses away. If they are thrown away, we must collect them again." That essay changed absolutely everything for Hurston's legacy. Readers discovered her brilliant work for the very first time. In 1978, Harper and Row decided to reprint Their Eyes Were Watching God. They printed 75,000 copies right away. Every single copy sold out in less than 1 month. The novel that had failed during Zora's lifetime became a literary phenomenon. The book that sold fewer than 5,000 copies in Zora's entire lifetime has now sold well over 1 million copies worldwide. Today, Their Eyes Were Watching God is taught in schools and universities all across America. It is part of the literary canon. In 2005, Oprah Winfrey produced a film adaptation of the novel starring Halle Berry as Janie. Zora Neale Hurston had arrived. Every year, Eatonville hosts the Zora Festival, now in its 36th year. Her Fort Pierce house is a National Historic Landmark. But I keep coming back to that unmarked grave, 13 years forgotten, while America's literary world simply moved on without her. It makes you wonder, how many other geniuses are out there right now, waiting to be rediscovered? Whose stories have we lost? Zora once wrote to W.E.B. Du Bois, proposing a special cemetery for illustrious Negro dead. Du Bois dismissed the idea entirely. She wrote, "Let no Negro celebrity lie in inconspicuous forgetfulness. We must assume responsibility for honoring their graves." Thanks to Alice Walker's determination, Zora Neale Hurston is no longer forgotten. Her genius is no longer lost to history. Zora's own words, "I have been in sorrow's kitchen and licked out all the pots. Then I stood on the mountain with harp and sword.